passage of Title IX. An amendment to the Civil Rights Act, which granted women and girls equal access to federally funded education and related programs.
No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity of receiving federal financial
Overall, what
assistance.
Title IX did was it gave women legal legs to contest some really outrageous acts of discrimination.
Without Title IX, women wouldn't have even been in the game. Probably one of the most important pieces of legislation of the 20th century.
One of the most important pieces of educational legislation in the last century.
Bernice Sandler is known as the godmother of Title IX, the 1972 legislation that prohibits sex discrimination at federally funded educational institutions.
Bernice R. Sandler, known as the godmother.
Bigger game changer for women. Please welcome to the Yale Center floor, the godmother of Title IX, Dr. Bernice Bunny Sandler.
Forgot you were here. Can you believe it? What were you doing in there? Oh, my photo albums. Oh God, I haven't looked at those. Why were you looking at my photo albums? Oh, yes, no, I did. You're right. I did say that. No, I don't know if I've said this, but I now have memory problems, but you'll forgive me, I hope. No, Rora, I have to say I'm very pleased you're here. It's really lovely that you took time out of your busy... Are you still in college? A senior, how nice. That's a busy year. Yeah. Can I get you anything? Have you had lunch? Are you sure? I have water. I have orange juice. Okay, well, if you change your mind. No, I have to say, I'm very pleased you're here. You know, your father was here just last week. He's a good man. What is beeping? I think it's the phone. You heard. Well, it's got to be something in this area, maybe with a timer. Okay. Yeah. See, that's on, so that's working.
Hi, Bunny. We've got Rora coming up to see you. Just want to let you know.
I didn't hear the phone ring. Okay. Yeah, I've learned to get rid of the bad calls you get, you know, the ones that, yeah, the telemarketers. I say, oh, I'm sorry to tell you, she died last week. They get right off and they take you off the list. So I do that now, and I got one call last week. It was the first one in 2 or 3 weeks, maybe. Yeah, it takes a while too. So so I say sorry, she just died, and then they want to get off because they don't know whether you're a close relative or what. So they get off as fast as they can. Now, Rora, can I get you anything to eat? Oh, Title IX. Yeah, sure. Let's sit down. Yeah. I used to give a lot of speeches on this stuff. I was traveling around a lot. I was traveling maybe 40 trips a year, but at some point I got sick. But sometimes people still call to interview. I always talk to them when I can. The young people don't know anything about this stuff. No, I mean, what did I know about the women's movement? How much do you know? Very little. They don't know and they don't care, and that's okay, but I'm always happy to talk about it. Now, Rora, tell me, what would you like to talk about? Bunny, I've always known that you are the godmother of Title IX. Hold on. Let me just make sure this is recording. Cool. Okay. I've always known that you are the godmother of Title IX, but I just realized recently that I don't actually know. You know, I know so much, or not so much, but remember I did that project on you in Title IX in 7th grade? Yeah, it was. So I've always felt very proud of you, or at least I felt cool to be related to you, because you're kind of this feminist celebrity, if you know feminist celebrities. But I didn't realize until recently that I don't actually know the story, your story about it. I know that you filed the lawsuit which turned into Title IX, which is huge, but I don't actually know, you know, what was it like? How did it all happen? Oh, yeah, sure. It all started in 1969. But that's not exactly what happened. When I visited my great Aunt Bunny, my senior year of college. Most of this happened. 1/3 of a cup of Yoplait yogurt for lunch. Yes. The telemarketer's thing, verbatim. Launching into her story with accuracy about dates? No. Describing in detail her trailblazing adventures as a feminist icon, walking into her congresswoman's office for the first time. The looks on the faces of her colleagues, the smells of the notebooks she filled? No. This is how I knew Bunny. I lived with her for a summer, the summer after my freshman year of college, when I was working for Senator Feinstein on the Hill, because I thought I was going into politics. I lived with her, and I knew her as charming and delightful and smart and generous and kind of annoyingly worried about me all the time. She used to ask me what time I needed to get out of bed in the morning so that I wouldn't oversleep and be late to work. She asked me this every day for about 2 weeks until finally I sat her down and I said, Bunny, if I oversleep and I'm late to work, I will get in trouble and I will learn something and I won't do it again. And she thought about it and said, oh, that's okay then. She's always really liked people learning things. So, this is how I knew her. This is her apartment. You walk in, and the first thing you notice are giant windows looking out onto a forest, which is kind of crazy in the middle of DC. And then, if you're paying attention, you start to see little bird things everywhere. And I mean everywhere. Porcelain, plates, fridge magnets, little statues, stuffed animals, embroidery, posters, prints, paintings. And then, of course, there are the prints from women's movements, all along the walls, originals and replicas, mostly from suffrage, or more accurately, mostly anti-suffrage. She's always really loved how people portrayed the suffragists when they were against them. You walk into her apartment, and it's like you're walking into a mini museum. And she's always loved to talk about it. Yeah, I have some good stuff here. Okay, yeah. Where, oh where, is my wandering wife tonight? And there he is, holding his own 2 babies. She's out there trying to get votes for women. He is not pleased about this. It's obviously gonna ruin their marriage, which, the way he's reacting, that's probably a good idea. These were very important campaigns. There were marches, there were parades, there were people getting arrested. You know, the first people tying themselves, chaining themselves to the fence at the White House. It's the women looking for the vote. So, you know, I had a lot of fun collecting all this stuff, and then it's silly, you put it on the wall and you look at it occasionally. Yeah, when I went to school, it was just a mention, you know, in 1920, women were given the vote. Given, as if they did. I mean, they fought for it. I thought of them as funny little old ladies when I read about them in the one paragraph in the history book. Now, it's a little bit more, which is nice. I say, Bunny, do you think that people will think of you as a funny little old lady? She says, probably some do. It's quite possible, but the issue is taken more seriously now. Bunny's always loved sharing stories. A teacher through and through. But by the time that I needed to sit on that couch and ask her, Bunny, I walk around campus with all these statues of old white guys, and I study in buildings with names carved into desks that don't look like my own, and I need stories, myths of American women who feel real to me, not dowdy little old ladies, but people I can pray to, you know? And I cannot believe I've never asked you this, but how did you become involved in the landmark legislation for women's rights and education in the 20th century? How did you become the godmother of Title IX? By the time that I needed to ask her, she couldn't tell me. It's a story that she's told many times to many people, but today, she can't. So I'm going to. From articles she has written in the past, and speeches she has given on college campuses all across the country, from interviews she has given, from hundreds of letters she has saved, her meeting notes, her photographs, from my interviews with her and with her kids, from transcripts of congressional testimony, from 70 boxes of donated papers she has given to the Schlesinger Library, I am going to do my best to tell you her story. She would say that it started in 1969, but I think it started before that. doctorate at the University of Maryland. 1969, so let's see, Nixon was sworn in January. It is the year of Woodstock and the Stonewall riots in Greenwich Village. Last year, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. Last year, Yale College admits women for the first time, so it is the height of the civil rights movement. But I'm not involved in any of that. No, I am teaching at the University of Maryland. I've just gotten my doctorate in education, and I'm teaching. The year I get my degree, there is a huge expansion in the department. 7 permanent job openings, all at once. And they don't even consider hiring me. It is not my qualifications, they are excellent. So I go to one of the guys I know fairly well, and I say, hey, how come they didn't even think of me? And he's really very frank. He says, well, let's face it, buddy, you come on too strong for a woman. Too strong for a woman. 5 words that changed my life. My reaction at the time, I go home and I weep. I say, oh my God, I never should have spoken up in staff meetings. I never should have. I talked too much in class as a graduate student. I never should have. Whatever, you know, I blame myself. It was my then husband, Jerry. He was really very good. He listens to me for a long time, and then he says, Bunny, are there strong men in the department? And I say, yeah. And he says, then it's not you, it's them. It's sex discrimination. And I think, no. Sex discrimination. Like many women at the time, I am somewhat ambivalent about the women's movement. You know, I halfway believe the press descriptions. Abrasive, man-hating, radical, unfeminine. I certainly wasn't part of NOW, National Organization of Women. I mean, they marched. Proper ladies didn't march. But my husband labeled the department's behavior as sex discrimination. He named it. Naming things, that's very important. You know, how do you, before you name them? So that gets me thinking. And then what happens is I have 2 more bad experiences in a relatively short time. 1, I go for a research job for which I am eminently qualified, and the entire interview is spent telling me, not talking about my qualifications, but telling me why this guy doesn't want to hire women who have children. Because if they have children, they will be taking time off whenever the child has sniffles. I say, oh, my kids, very logical, because I think this is a logical issue. You know, I say, my kids are in high school. That won't be a problem. I don't take off when they have a cold. He says, no, women want to work at home if they have kids. He just goes on, and here I am thinking of it as a logical problem, which of course it isn't. And then I go to an employment agency, and I hand over my resume, and the guy looks at it and says, oh, you're not a professional, you're just a housewife who went back to school. I have my doctorate, and this man is telling me I'm not a professional? So, you know, these 3 experiences sort of, wow, something's going on. I'm a great one who believes in books, and whenever there is something wrong in my life, I find a book and I read about it. Bibliotherapy. So, I start reading up. Okay. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, that's 1964, prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin, not sex, okay. Title VII includes sex, but explicitly excludes educational institutions in their educational activities. There isn't anything on women and discrimination. I quickly learned, you know, I think this is immoral, it must be illegal, but I quickly learned that sex discrimination is not illegal, at least not in education. You know, I always thought it was an individual. Some men might have prejudice against women, but that wouldn't happen to me, particularly because I am so smart. You know who has achieved something. So I start reading up on what the blacks have done in terms of civil rights. I'm reading a booklet from the Commission on Civil Rights, which is talking about civil rights enforcement, you know, schools and integration. And it's only really talking about, I think in these days they're still called Negro. I don't think we've gotten to black, but it certainly isn't talking about Hispanic Americans, and it certainly isn't talking about women. The report describes a presidential executive order. that prohibits discrimination by federal contractors in employment on the basis of race, color, national origin, not sex, okay. Oh, there is a footnote. And being an academic, you read the footnotes. Quickly turn to the back of the book, and it says, Executive Order 11246 has been amended by President Johnson, effective October 13th, 1968, to include discrimination based on sex. I literally scream in my home, blah, kind of thing. I am alone and I scream. It is a eureka moment. I just want to pause here because this is crazy. Bunny, without any legal background whatsoever, finds a presidential executive order, doesn't help her, reads the footnote of that executive order, which amends it and changes everything. The amended executive order states that federal contractors cannot discriminate in employment on the basis of sex. Bunny realizes that most universities have federal contracts. It is therefore illegal for those universities to discriminate in employment on the basis of sex. At this time, most people don't have sex discrimination in their lexicon. Bunny didn't until very recently. But because she finds a presidential executive order and finds the amendment of that executive order, because she reads a footnote, it is now illegal. And that's crazy. So, Bunny's sitting alone in her home, and she screams, blah! And then immediately I think, oh, this can't be right. Who am I to have discovered this? You know, how did no one think of this before? So I make a call. What happens is I call the Office of Federal Contract Compliance. A woman answers. I say, excuse me, I'd like to know if Executive Order 11246, or as amended, 11375, covers colleges that have contracts. She says, let me put you through to the director. Even though I live in Washington, I don't know anybody who directs anything, so that is kind of interesting. The director is a man named Vincent Macaluso. He listens to me and then he says, why don't you come in and we'll talk about it? So I agree and I hang up. Oh. I'm thinking, you know, does he actually want to talk about it, or is this man coming on to me? Because nobody's ever shown that kind of interest in I mean, he really seems interested. But of course I go in, and it turns out he had been waiting for someone to come. Interview with Vincent Macaluso, 10 December 69. Vincent Macaluso says, I'm right about this, and he wants to help me, but he can't be seen to do anything because he can't be seen to have an agenda. He doesn't say all this at the time. I learned some of this later. But Vincent Macaluso was recently hired, and his boss is the Secretary of Labor to Nixon. So, you know, he sees that there was something big here, and he can't do anything, but I can. Complaints. He says, you need to file a complaint. He says, you need to file a complaint that the federal government has done nothing to observe the presidential executive order. Nothing. Here's what you need to do. He says, you know, you need to gather all that information that's out there. I say, there isn't much information out there. He says, it doesn't matter. You need to get a whole pack of stuff because nobody's going to read it anyway. But if it's thick, people will believe that there's a problem. I mean, that was brilliant, but it was absolutely true. Bunny's actual meeting notes. Women intimidated plus afraid equals not to reveal their names, underlined. Because the executive order already exists, this can be a class action suit, which means that Bunny's name doesn't need to be on it. She has found a way to protect herself using existing laws, and not only that, she has found a way for any woman in her position to do the same, to demand equality while keeping themselves and their names safe. But first, she has to find a whole pack of stuff to send with a complaint. I do a quick survey at the University of Maryland, pretending I'm doing research. You know, I go around to a bunch of the departments and I say, I need a list of all the faculty, and I need to know which ones are men and women. and they give it to me. I also have some clippings from newsletters that I've saved. At the same time, I become involved with WHEEL, Women's Equity Action League, which is started by a woman named Betty Boyer, who quickly realizes that now is too radical for a lot of middle-class professional women. You know, we go to someone's home, and we sit, and we talk, I mean, seriously, for the first times, about our careers, what we want. So, when I'm collecting data, I go to them, and they give me some stuff, and they also make me their chair of their action committee on federal contract compliance. I am the entire committee. In the end, I have 80 pages worth of stuff. I underline the good parts in case anyone flips through. Vincent helps me write the first complaint, and I send it out. It is against the University of Maryland. At the same time, I send out a press release, and it gets published in the Saturday Review of Literature, which is, it's like this fancy book review. A lot of academics read it. So, you know, they put something in, and it's like this big, and it gets me so excited, you know, for further information, contact. And what happens is, I start getting letters. Dear Miss Sandler, I'm writing to ask if WHEEL can provide me with information on filing a writ at Stanford University, where I am a student. If so, could you please send it to the above address? Yours truly, Emma Price. Dear Dr. Sandler, after reading the article in the November 20th issue of Science magazine, several questions of personal importance were still left in my mind. Dear Dr. Sandler, from your experience in this area, dear Dr. Sandler, what is the best method about going about a suit, privately or through your agency? Dear Dr. Sandler, your project is of particular interest to me in connection with a seminar I planned for the spring of 1971 on women's rights. I would very much appreciate any information you could give me concerning the complaints. Sincerely, Ruth B. Ginsburg, Professor of Law. More articles are published. All over the country, people are reading about what I'm doing, and they write me because they want to do something too. So, I write them back, and I give them information about how to collect data for a complaint, and if they send me that data, I'll file the complaint on their behalf. I'm in the position, you know, by this time I make the decision. I'm never going to be hired in academia. I mean, I know that, so I might as well be doing all this stuff because they aren't going to hire me anyway. So I have that kind of freedom. I write back, dear Dr. Rowlands, dear Helen, dear Ruth, dear Jean, dear Nancy, dear Marie, dear Betty. Enclosed are some WHEEL materials which may be of interest to you. We're hoping to get a local WHEEL chapter started within the next month or so. I'll keep you posted. Dr. Brooks, Dr. Freyer, Mr. Corson, Ms. Lawrence, dear Jessie. Here are the materials we talked about. Ms. McGrath, Ms. Burns, Dr. Thornhow, dear Diana. I'm delighted to hear that you're ready to move forward with plans on how to help business, help women. Do keep it another idea. Have you some sort of packet or brochure that can be handed out at management conferences? Right on and on and on. Dr. Bernice Bunny Sandler. I work with a wonderful woman named Ann Scott from Now to make an anti-discrimination kit, which has all the information anybody needs about this. All the information there is about this because we're making all of it up. Excuse me. Thank you. So, we're filing complaints now like mad because we're doing them all by typewriter, no computers, carbon paper. And this is not easy to do because I'm not a very good typist. In the end, we filed over 250 complaints.
Lavender's blue, dilly dilly, lavender's green. When you are king, dilly dilly, I shall be queen. you so, dilly dilly, who told you so? 'Twas my own heart, dilly dilly, that told me so. 'Twas my own heart, dilly dilly, that told me so.
Over 250 complaints. And here's something in Bunny's heart that she wouldn't tell you. Bunny met her husband, Jerry, in their early 20s. They married 6 months later. He helped start National Public Radio, which moved them to a new state with 2 new daughters. They both loved folk music. Jerry was a big man. He smoked. They both did for a while. He had no concept of vegetables. Jerry was a good man in many ways. He named it sex discrimination. He believed in equality. But when Bunny started working on all of this, really working, he couldn't quite wrap his head around equal rights means equal rights everywhere. It means sharing the housework. It means sharing finances. It means partnership. Bunny always hated cooking. Neither of them were very good at it, so with the girls in high school, they stopped eating meals together. But while Bunny was doing all of this, filing over 250 complaints, submitting hundreds of letters, she was also doing the laundry and buying groceries and getting pricing for new carpets. And she didn't tell anyone about it. Her marriage was important to her. Ladies didn't get divorced.
Call all your men, dilly dilly, set them to work. Some to the plow, dilly dilly, some to the cart. Some to make hay, dilly dilly, some to cut corn. While you and I, dilly dilly, keep ourselves warm.
So, we're filing complaints now like mad. And at the same time, we're making waves on Capitol Hill. Something else Vincent suggests. He says, when you file a complaint, you send a copy of that complaint to your congressperson. And when you do, he says, you ask them to write the Secretary of Labor, his boss, asking him to enforce the executive order. That was his job, to enforce it. What I later learned was, when a congressperson writes a letter to a secretary of a department, there is a special person called the congressional liaison who actually handles the letter. First it goes to the secretary's office, and then it gets passed all the way down, and everybody's reading about sex discrimination on the way down from the congressperson, saying, what are you going to do about this complaint? Whatever. So it gets passed all the way down, and everybody's reading about it, until finally it gets to the person that actually writes the answer. And then it goes all the way back up with the answer, and everybody has to sign off on it. This is the government, so everybody has to sign off. So, it is a wonderful educational device. You can keep it. We actually generate so much mail that the Departments of Labor and Health, Education, and Welfare have to hire several full-time personnel to answer the letters. Within 4 months, April 1970, the first investigations into colleges and their compliance with Executive Order 11375 are held. 1 at Harvard, 1 at the University of Michigan. Despite the fact that many of the complaints I file are subsequently lost by the government, and despite the fact that the initial investigation at Harvard only includes racial data and has to be redone after women's groups protest, the United States government is now directly and officially involved in investigating and remedying sex discrimination on college campuses and universities. Pandora's box, thank you, has finally been opened. And on the Hill, I am suddenly the expert on the whole thing. Now, this next part is Edith Green gets interested. Representative Edith Green, a Democrat from Oregon, a teacher. She's been in Congress a long time. She is chair of a special subcommittee on education, and she is aware of discrimination. She thinks she ought to do something, but there's no constituency. You can't hold hearings if there's nobody. Who would you ask to come testify, that sort of thing? Meanwhile, I'm sending her all these complaints. She's getting all this stuff from me, and she decides she'll introduce a bill, and I get called in by her staff member, an attorney. I mean, it's so heady because here I am, a little Jewish girl from Flatbush. Here I am on the Hill. A staff member wants to speak with me. He says, Bunny, we're introducing a bill. We're holding hearings, and we want a list of people who ought to testify more than we can use, people who are knowledgeable in higher education. He says, Bunny, I want you to work with me in setting up these hearings because you know all the people. And at this point, I do. Okay. June 1970, 5 days long. Friday, June 19th, at the Rayburn House Office Building. Representative Edith Green. The meeting will now come to order for further consideration of legislation that is now before the committee. William D. Hathaway, representative from Maine, said some crazy stuff.
I think college is warranted to have a policy that says they will take in slightly more men than women, because more men than women are going to be required immediately after graduation to get a job and support a family, and they should be limited to the number of people they take in. I think they should be warranted in such a policy.
Dr. Ann Harris, a professor from Columbia University. Do you believe in sexual equality?
And some, but not all, matters both ways. I don't think men should be required to work in women's locker rooms, for example.
No. As long as the women who work in women's locker rooms are paid the same as men who work in men's locker rooms. We will now turn to Dr. Sandler. Will you present your statement? Madam Chairman, Mr. Hathaway, I'm Dr. Bernice Sandler from the Women's Equity Action League, WHEEL, where I serve as chair of the Action Committee on Federal Contract Compliance. I have submitted a written statement for the record. Half of the brightest people in our country, half of the most talented people with the potential for the highest intellectual endeavor are women. Yet these gifted women will find it very difficult to obtain the same kind of quality education that is so readily available to their brothers. These women will encounter discrimination after discrimination, not once, not twice, but time after time in the very institutions which claim to preach the tenets of democracy and fair play. These women will face discrimination in admission, where they will encounter both official and unofficial quotas. They will face discrimination when they apply for scholarships and financial assistance. When they graduate, their own university will discriminate against them in helping them find jobs. They will be discriminated against in hiring for the faculty. If hired at all, they will be promoted far more slowly than their male counterparts, and they will most likely receive far less money than their colleagues of the other sex. Women on campuses all over the country have begun to form groups across departmental and professional lines. They are beginning to do more than complain. They are examining their own university's commitment and treatment of women. Women faculty, women staff, and women students are all participating. Women's rights are being included in a variety of student protest activities. In January at UChicago, 1969, the first demonstration concerning the equal rights for women took place. In February 1970, at the university, at Yale College, several students seized a microphone at an alumni dinner and made several complaints and demands concerning the treatment of women at Yale. We need to give women alternative and better ways of combating sex discrimination than seizing a microphone or taking over a building. It is within the power and responsibility of this committee and of the Congress to make such a change possible by passing legislation
such as that in Section 805 that will help alleviate discrimination on our campuses. The day that Bunny testified, there were two other witnesses in the room. Dr. Ann Harris, from whom we heard earlier, and civil rights activist and lawyer, Dr. Polly Murray. Madam Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I am Polly Murray, Professor of American Studies at Brandeis University. As a human rights attorney, I am concerned with individuals as whole human beings, being accorded the respect and dignity which is our common heritage. They are first and foremost persons, quite apart from any other identity they may possess. And as persons sharing common humanity, they are entitled to equal opportunity to fulfill their individual and unique potential. I have learned this lesson in part because I am both a Negro and a woman whose experience embodies the conjunction of race and sex discrimination. This experience also embodies the paradox of belonging simultaneously to an oppressed minority and an oppressed majority, and for good measure being left-handed in a right-handed world. The liberation of women through legislation, through a restructuring of our political and social institutions, and through a change of our cultural conditioning, may well hold the key to many of the complex social issues for which we do not now have answers. The hearings lasted 5 days and generated 1,200 pages of testimony and data. In an unusual move, Edith Green hired Bunny to compile the transcript together, to index it and make it more accessible. In an even more unusual move, she sent a copy to every member of Congress. Nothing like it has ever been assembled before or published. It is an eye-opener for anyone who reads it. Thus, I become the first person ever appointed to staff congressional committees specifically to work on women's issues, the first person to file a complaint, the first person to testify in Congress on sex discrimination in higher education. Looking back, there were more firsts than I realized. I just knew. I was trying. A story Bunny did not tell me. Someone else did. At some point in all of this, she was sitting in her car, driving, when suddenly she said to herself, I am a person. 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 The specific bill introduced in the Edith Green hearings ultimately fails. In the next several years, more pieces of anti-sex discrimination legislation are also introduced and also fail. Senator Birch Bayh becomes involved, as does Congresswoman Patsy Mink and many others. They think perhaps to open up the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to make it stronger for women. Others are worried that if opened up, it would become vulnerable to being weakened. So there are more hearings, more bills, more testimony. And while this is happening on the Hill, all over the country, women and men are using this 1,200-page document, the 250 complaints, the Hugh investigations into college campuses and their compliance with Executive Order 11375 to prove the existence of sex discrimination and demand equality in higher education. And then, on June 23rd, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 was passed, and on July 1st was signed into law by President Richard Nixon. And it was hardly noticed. I remember we had a meeting in Washington with Edith. We said, we're here, Representative Green, you tell us what you want us to do for lobbying, and we'll get the people and we'll do it. And she said, don't.
She said, this bill is going to pass, and if you start lobbying for it, people are going to start paying attention to it. Trust me, you don't need a lobby, it's going to pass. She was right. Even with all the awareness we had created, no one had any idea about the extent of sex discrimination in education, not even those of us involved, so no one knew what Title IX was going to do. Opponents of the bill, representatives from universities and their allies on the Hill, they asked for 2 exemptions. 1, they could still have admissions quotas for men and women for private universities. And 2, women wouldn't have to play on men's football teams. And that was it. They didn't even testify. No, they said, there's no such thing as sex discrimination, and besides, it's not a problem. And that's almost a verbatim quote, so they were not watching. They were not watching. No person shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program receiving federal financial assistance. It would be another 3 years before the regulation for Title IX would be issued, and another year before it would go into effect. By then, higher education in the country knew that Title IX was going to change the landscape of higher education forever. This is it. This little thing is the foundation on which we all stand. Many of you may have walked in here today knowing Title IX as the athletics bill. And the first couple of years after it was passed, it was all about athletics. Suddenly, schools had to fund women's teams by the same amount that they funded men's. A generation of women who never had the chance to play sports now had the opportunity, funding, and legal right to play. There are women I have spoken to for this piece who have told me that playing sports saved their lives. But Title IX is not the athletics bill. In 1972, when Title IX was passed, the term sexual harassment didn't exist. By 1980, recent law school graduate Catherine McKinnon argued on behalf of 5 undergraduate plaintiffs that sexual harassment was a form of sex discrimination and was thus illegal under Title IX. She won and ushered in a whole new era. Most college students today know Title IX as the Sexual Harassment and Assault Bill. That's how I knew it. A university's Title IX office educates students and faculty on what sexual harassment is, provides resources, and regulates the disciplinary process. Title IX coordinators are the people you go to if you or someone you know has experienced sexual harassment or assault, and they tell you what your options are. But Title IX is not just the Sexual Harassment and Assault Bill. It is a tool that has been used to radically change admissions quotas, classroom environment policies, educational employment opportunities, transgender rights, education for pregnant and parenting students, and on and on. It is a tool that can be picked up and used in ways that Bunny and her colleagues never imagined. Today, right now, there are lawsuits all across the country that are using this tool to demand change. Just last month at Yale, 3 students sued fraternities for sexual harassment under Title IX. Today, right now, politicians and lawmakers are deciding what the next wave of Title IX regulation will look like. Just last month, NYU declared its opposition to Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos's proposed regulation changes for Title IX. We are still debating the extent of this tool, and we are guided by our capacity to imagine. Even us, sitting here in this room, we cannot anticipate how this tool will be used by those who come after us. What structural inequalities exist in our schools today that we can't see yet, that we can't name yet? Bunny spent the rest of her career researching, writing, and speaking on this issue. In 1982, she published an article called The Chilly Classroom for Climate, in which she basically talked about microaggressions before that term became commonplace. When she was traveling and giving speeches on campuses all across the country, some women came up to her and described the cultural phenomenon of a woman having sex with multiple men at one night at frat parties.
What was that about? Bunny and her team led some of the first research into campus gang rape. They coined the term. The position of Title IX coordinators at each school, her idea. Bunny said that she thought Title IX would end sex discrimination within a year or two. After 2 years, she thought 10. After 10, 20. Then I finally realized that we were trying to change very strong patterns of behavior and belief, and that these changes would take more than my lifetime to accomplish. Indeed, Bunny passed away this January, at 90 years old, beloved. In her final days, a dear friend and caretaker told her, "I will be with you until the very end." Bunny said, "That's okay. I can do this by myself." When I first started writing this piece, I could call her any day and chat. And what was hard for me, what I did not anticipate, was that the more I learned, the more phenomenal Bunny became to me. But I don't know if she truly knew it. In the 50 years since Title IX was passed, she came to define her life through her work as an activist, a feminist, a secret world changer. She and Jerry divorced in 1978. She never remarried. It was hard for me watching her not be able to do the work by which she defined her life and not realizing her tremendous worth beyond her legacy, beyond her activism, in her personhood, to all who knew and loved her. This show was also hard for me because there were some things that I wanted to say to Bunny that I never said. Because I was afraid when I sat with her on that couch that if I shared my story, if I said it out loud, she wouldn't be able to respond in the way I needed her to, or she would forget it, and that would be hard for me. So I never told her my full story, just as she couldn't tell me hers. And I think that's okay, because she gave me an American woman hero who will always feel alive and real to me, someone I can pray to. So, here's my prayer today. Bunny, I was sexually assaulted, which is a great loss of power in my body, in my mind, for trusting this man. And because of you, there were systems in place. There were people at my school who could give power back to me. You found power where there was none. You created power where there was none, and you institutionalized it, and you left it behind. I would be a different person if you had not created that strength and authority on which I rested. And I cannot thank you enough.
I'm now going to be 90 this year, so I'm aging, and so it's harder than it used to be. It takes a little longer. Well, why not? So
What's your birthday, Bunny?
In March.
March what?
March 3rd.
March.
Be a little ugly. I am a little Yeah. So a lot of people used to come through, and now a lot of them have died off. So there are less of them left. I will be the last survivor, I'm sure. So. On the other hand, I learned to be alone and not minded, which is a good thing to be able to do.
It was very helpful to me because a friend of mine got me to teach guitar, and I realized I loved teaching. I remember one person said, "You're the best teacher I've ever had in my entire life." But I haven't done that in years, nor will I do it again. Men in the department had never given women tenure. They'd hire someone to keep them for 3 years, and then not to give them tenure and let them go. And that was their pattern. Yeah. And I got mad. What didn't happen to me, but I could see that it would. Yeah.
take me to